Quick question. What's something completely legal that still makes you feel like you're doing something wrong? Let me know your answer in the comments below. Anyway, on to the video. Our story begins in a windy and dusty desert, and for some strange reason, there's a freaking apartment building just chilling in the middle of all that nothingness. Stranger still is the nerdy-looking Chad at the foot of the apartment building, just taking in the sights and getting his stalker vibe on. Of course, he has his hentai protagonist hairstyle on, so we know he's here for business. True to that thought, he scribbles something in his notebook before locking in on the zombie gym bro-looking guards at the entrance of the apartment. Noticing his gaze, the swole gym zombies take a beat before zeroing in on him as well. They flash a predatory smile, clearly delighted by the unexpected meal that had willingly delivered himself to them. Not that they were complaining, but what was a feeble-looking, probably tasty kid like him doing there? Could it be that he came to save the other guy they'd kidnapped earlier today? If so, then he was either insanely brave or stupid. Either way, they'd be having a feast today, so why should they care? They laughed out loud, obviously finding the whole situation hilarious. Unbeknownst to them, the Chad had dropped his hentai MC vibe and taken on an emo, I'm about to fuck your shit up vibe instead. Rocking that Dio Jojo stance, he hit them with Za Worldo, blitzing the shit out of their necks. The attack was so fast the gym bros didn't even know how they died. Over at the top floor, a feast was underway, with numerous human skulls piled on the banquet floor. The participants chanted the host's name, praising him for capturing another human for them to feast on. The leader, who low-key looked a little restarted with that lazy eye, soaked in the praise, telling the minions this much was nothing to him. If they stuck by him, he'd make sure to feed them their fill of human flesh. The minions were delighted by this, and glazed him even more. They celebrated their lungs out, until a foot stomp echoed through the room. With the stomp came a gloomy aura, a sharp contrast to the lively atmosphere of the banquet. This drew the leader's attention, and he immediately turned to scrutinize the new arrival. The same was true for the captured human, who couldn't hide his shock at the bizarre sight. Ignoring the prey's anxious fidgeting, the leader questioned his men. Why was a human there? And how come the guards at the entrance didn't capture him? Could it be that those lazy bastards were slacking off again? He wanted to curse them out, but a sudden thumping sound made him choke on his words. Before him were the heads of his guards, a sight that made him glare in rage. He unleashed his killing intent, terrifying everyone with the intense pressure. Just as he was about to lunge into battle, a soft voice called out, asking to be excused. It inquired about Craven, and whether the mighty zombie could be found there. This blatant disregard enraged the leader, who was already at his limits with fury. He glared at the nerdy Chad, clearly feeling insulted by his nonchalance. Suppressing his brimming rage, the leader asked if he was there on a rescue mission. Had he come to rescue his friend? Was that why he was being so brazenly disrespectful? The nerd replied that that wasn't the case. In fact, he hadn't seen that man ever in his life. As he'd mentioned before, he was there for Craven, and that could be confirmed by the amazing and completely lifelike drawing he'd made of him. The leader glanced at the painting, and his anger flared even more. First of all, how was that an amazing drawing? He should get that bullshit, Mona Lisa wannabe trash out of his face. Second of all, if he wasn't there on a rescue mission, then why did he kill his men? The nerdy Chad looked at him calmly before answering. They were annoying. He killed them because they annoyed him. It was as simple as that. The nonchalant disregard sent the leader into a frenzy. He called out to his most trusted minion, ordering him to kill the intruder. In fact, he should make it painful. Only then would his hatred subside. The minion said bet and lunged forward. He spawned in front of the nerd, dicing his body into meat chunks. Under the leader's satisfied gaze and the captive's horrified expression, he performed a simple salute, confirming that the target had been eliminated. However, before he could finish his report, a sudden chill tingled down his spine, causing him to shiver in fear. He immediately turned around, only to witness a scene straight out of a horror film. The nerd, who had clearly been butchered, was now regenerating his body, piecing together like a grotesque jigsaw. He even had the leisure to throw shade, taunting the budget Zabuza that he couldn't kill him with just that. Before the budget shinobi could process what the hell was going on, our boy spawned behind him, yeeting the absolute shit out of him. The kick was so powerful that the homie checked out early, clearly intending to reunite with his beloved Haku. In any case, he was out of there, and even the leader's foolish face couldn't get him to come back. Speaking of the leader, his brain low-key lagged at the absurd sight, but he quickly pulled himself together, ordering his men to jump the fool. The men didn't hesitate and charged forward. They bellowed war cries, closing in on our boy with the quickness. To this, the Chad simply shot them a bored look before swinging his arm. The move made bones sprout from the ground, clearing a path as they barreled through the crowd. Before the minions could process what in the Kimimaro was going on, the nerd teleported before them, grabbed a bone, and boned the shit out of their comrade's face. Pause. This left the leader sweating, but of course our boy wouldn't stop on his account. He spawned behind another minion, cleaving the poor bastard in two. With that done, he tossed away the bone, clawed into his gut, and ripped out his innards. Using that as a whip, he cracked open a minion's skull before obliterating a second one with a downward smash. Realizing the innards were crumbling beyond repair, the Chad sighed in annoyance before tossing them away. He then dug into his ribcage, pulled out a couple of broken ribs, and slung them at the minions like some ghastly shurikens. Ignoring the terrified foes, our boy stabbed into his gut and ripped out another innard. He whipped it forward, clocking 3 minions in a single shot. As he did, his wound slowly regenerated, mending itself like a stitched seam pulling tight in reverse. The minions saw this and said, "Fuck that." They'd be insane to want more of that smoke. Too bad they were already in it, and our boy wouldn't let them go so easily. To their horror, the Chad flexed his fingers before conjuring, "I shit you not," a brain. He then yeeted it at a foe, cracking his head open like an egg. Summoning the tossed brain, he shrank it down and used it as a baseball. With a bone as the bat, he hit a home run, pulverizing the hell out of the second foe's head. Settling into that rhythm, he struck another hole-in-one, with the hole obviously being the gap left in the minions' heads. Again and again he let them things fly, sending the remaining foes ahead. When it was all said and done, the room settled into an unnerving silence, with the leader moving up the restarted spectrum. He had his mouth wide agape, clearly struggling to fathom what the hell had just happened. He wanted to curse out the Chad, but the homie spawned in front of him, causing him to choke on his words a second time. Visibly terrified, he stared at the MC, wondering how he'd moved so fast. In fact, even with his enhanced senses, he hadn't picked up on his movements at all. Unfortunately for him, our boy had no intention of satisfying his curiosity. He coolly ignored the puzzled expression and asked if he was Craven. Picking up on the bizarre gloom that had been hanging in the air ever since that question, the leader skillfully dodged it and asked a question of his own. Why was he looking for Craven? Although he was sweating bullets, he manned the hell up and asked anyway. The MC shot him the same bored expression before answering. He was looking for Craven because rumors had it that he would be able to kill him. The leader, who I'm assuming is Craven, heard his reply and lost his shit. Rumors. Who had been spreading such bullshit rumors about him? If he found the bastard who'd set this monster on him, he'd make sure to feed him a 2-piece combo. Before that, though, he should probably try to make it out of here alive. He swung at the MC, hoping to rock his shit a little bit. However, before he could complete his attack, green veins wrapped around him, trapping him in place. The veins were obviously from the MC, who'd lost interest after not receiving a reply. He tugged on them, shredding Craven's body into pieces. Witnessing all this, the captive shuddered in terror. Who was this monster, and how could he possibly kill so many zombies? In fact, was he even safe being left alone with this freak? He shot the MC a nervous glance, terrified by what could happen next. However, contrary to his delusional thoughts, the MC simply tore off his gag. He then asked the same question, seeking to ascertain Craven's location. The captive looked at him tensely before answering. The zombie he'd just clapped was Craven. The MC, clearly taken aback by this, stared at the corpse with his dead eyes. Who would have thought the rumored Craven would be that weak? Well, he was dead now, so he might as well continue with his quest. He stood up to leave, only to be held back by the captive. He'd wanted to ask for a favor, but the hollow look in the MC's eyes made him choke on his words. Suppressing his fear, he swallowed the request and bowed in gratitude. No matter what, the freak had still saved his life, so the least he could do was be grateful. The MC, however, waved off the gratitude and trudged off. He quickly disappeared from the captive's sight, finding himself back in the desert. As he did, he flipped open his notebook and slashed a cross through Craven's face, marking another failure, the weight of which will be revealed later. We also learn a bit of the world's lore, shedding light on why things are the way they are. Many years ago, a zombie virus spread, laying ruin to the entire planet. The majority of humans were turned into zombies, with only a pitiful few managing to survive. Among the millions of the infected, some began to evolve, mutating into intelligent zombie-human hybrids. He was one of the survivors, of course, but he wouldn't call himself lucky. For whatever reason, after Doomsday, he discovered he'd been cursed with immortality. Staring at the marked grave before him, the MC sighed in defeat and muttered an apology to his mother. He'd tried his best not to, but somehow, he had managed to survive yet again. Damn. Taking a break from the emo MC, we shift back to the apartment building where the captive is complaining his lungs out. He curses the MC, arguing that if he'd wanted to save him, he should have done it properly, god damn it. What was the point of rescuing him and still leaving him tied up? What a bastard. As he was grumbling to himself, a voice called out, referring to him as Mr. Kyuho. The captive, or rather, Kyuho, turned to face two new arrivals, his team leader and another colleague, Dongho. Visibly relieved to see that Kyuho was alive, Dongho quickly helped him out of his restraints, asking what had happened. How had he gotten captured? Kyuho replied that it was just bad luck. He'd visited the apartment building to scavenge for supplies, only to unexpectedly run into Craven. He didn't know if he should call it bad luck, but fortune was definitely ghosting his ass right now. As he told his story, the leader ignored him and focused on the room instead. She then called out to him, asking what the hell happened there. Kyuho, noticing the intensity in his leader's tone, didn't hide anything and told her about the MC. Of course, he didn't know his name, so he just referred to him as a badass student. The leader listened to his recount and told him to hold the fuck up. Was he trying to say that a student clapped all these cheeks, including Craven's? Pause. How was she supposed to believe that? Kyuho replied that it might sound impossible, but a student did indeed tenderize their shit. He came in swinging, effectively wiping out the entire horde. Realizing Kyuho was serious, the leader believed him and asked about the MC's location. Where had he trudged off to? To this, Kyuho simply lowered his head in shame. He shared that he'd wanted to inquire about that, but the hollow look in the MC's eyes made him shrink in fear. He didn't have the balls to ask after that terrifying sight. Joining the conversation, Dongho asked if the MC was a zombie human. Was that why Kyuho was so terrified? However, contrary to his speculation, Kyuho clarified that the MC was human. He might not have been all there upstairs, but he was indeed human. The leader listened to his recount as she tracked the MC's movements. There wasn't a lot to go off of, but she had enough to deduce a simple trail. Back in the forest, the MC was chilling, unaware he had people spying on him. Or maybe he knew, but he was too edgy to care. In any case, the stalkers were Kyuho and the gang, who'd managed to track him down. Eyeing the gloomy and downright emo MC, the leader confirmed with Kyuho if what he'd said was correct. Kyuho replied that it was, but why was she asking? Before he could get a response, the leader suddenly jetted out of the bushes, spawning beside the MC. She slashed her dagger at him, but of course, our boy dodged that, staring at her with a puzzled expression. Who was this bitch? And why was she attacking strangers so casually? To this, the leader flashed a beaming smile and complimented him sincerely. She'd truly wanted to kill him with that strike, but to think he'd dodged it? However, he was mistaken if he thought her slash was that simple. True to her words, a cut mark appeared on the MC's neck before his head was sent flying. He glanced at her in surprise for a moment before nonchalantly reaching out to reattach it. However, the leader had anticipated this and immediately opened fire. She let it rain on his head, effectively lighting his shit up. When she was done, she turned her gaze back to the MC, seemingly asking, "What will you do now?" The MC, as nonchalant as ever, simply reached into his neck and pulled out another head. This left the leader speechless, clearly trying to wrap her head around what the hell was going on. But after recalling Kyuho's story, she said, fuck it, and decided to go with the flow. She flashed another smile at the MC, marveling at his absurd immortality. Picking up on the leader's crazed expression, the MC decisively ignored the psycho. He told her to go away. He didn't appreciate people bothering him. The leader, however, said to hell with that and clocked him in the face. She then spun around, landing a nasty kick to his gut. Pressing the attack, she closed in on him and ruthlessly opened fire. She meant that shit too. Every shot was aimed for a headshot. To this, the MC finally stopped holding back and let it rip. He lashed out his vein tentacles, easily deflecting the bullets. To the leader's bewilderment, he shot her a mean glare, warning her to stop messing around. If she insisted on bothering him, then he'd have no choice but to kill her. The leader picked up on her cornered position and wisely backed down. Why wouldn't she, when her main goal had been achieved? However, she had things to do, so she immediately lunged forward. She instantly closed the gap between them, pressing her dagger to his neck. From that position, she brought up the topic she'd been meaning to discuss, one she'd been trying to probe with her earlier actions. How effective was his immortality? And to what extent could he regenerate? The question caught the MC off guard, as he hadn't expected her to ask that. However, as if sensing something, he immediately focused on his wound and how it hadn't completely healed yet. This surprised the MC, who grabbed it with a dazed look. He instantly understood the implications and quickly turned to face the leader. How had she done that? Realizing she had his attention, the leader opted to start with the formalities. She introduced herself as Lee Kyung, the captain of the lethal force. As for his question, it would naturally be answered if he joined them. Of course, she wasn't asking him to join for free. They would compensate him. Word on the street was that he was looking for a way to die. If he joined them, she'd make sure to grant his wish and find a way to kill him. Still struggling with the sudden bombshells, the MC asked for clarification. What did she mean they'd find a way to kill him? The leader replied that it was as she'd said, they'd delete his ass. They had a capable scientist on their side, and if it was that psycho, she was certain he would find a way to kill him for good. Case in point was the wound on his neck. She was certain nothing like that had ever happened to him, and it was all because of the knife she was holding. Well, the knife was the scientist's invention, so who knows what other miracles he could pull off. The MC thought about it, and for the first time, hope kindled in his heart. He looked at Kyung desperately, as if trying to hold on to this fleeting feeling. Realizing how desperate he was, Kyung flashed him a somber smile and asked for his name. She'd already introduced herself. Shouldn't he do the same? The MC looked at her and, for the first time since the story began, shared his name. He was Mirae On. Mirae. Kyung softly repeated his name and told him not to worry. They would mop up all the zombies in the world, reclaim all the lost lands, and when that was done, she would make sure to delete him. The bold words left Mirae dazed for a moment, and for the first time in a long while, he actually felt his heart beat. His hollow eyes lit up like never before, and the dying embers in his heart finally rekindled. After all that searching, he was finally so close to his wish. He could end it all and join her. He could finally die one day. Following Mirae's official recruitment into the party, we skip forward to when the gang was gearing up to return to their base. After reaching out to their pickup, an awkward silence suddenly and strangely settled over the group. Feeling uncomfortable, Kyuho decided to bring up the elephant in the room. Was the pickup, Garam, still allowed to drive? He thought that privilege had been revoked after she drove them off a cliff that one time. Dongho replied that he didn't know, but he sure as hell wasn't getting into a vehicle driven by that psycho. As the two conversed, a blaring horn echoed through the forest, and in came the psycho herself, Garam. Just as rumored, the maiden couldn't drive for shit. She almost totaled the car just trying to stop. I wonder what monstrous legs she had to stomp on the brakes that hard. Luckily, she arrived safely, and immediately exited the van to greet the squad. Mai and Mirae's first thoughts upon seeing her were, meh, she's mid. But she wasn't meant to be a waifu anyway, so I guess it's fine. Kyung, however, ignored the useless banter and introduced the new recruit. She told Garam a bit about Mirae, and left him in her care as his senior. From then on, anything to do with the emo, suicidal Chad would be her responsibility. Garam didn't see this as a challenge. She immediately locked in and enthusiastically extended her hand in greeting, overjoyed to finally get a junior. However, Mirae hit her with the ghosting no jutsu and promptly ignored her ass, leaving her there with her hands still outstretched in embarrassment. We shift to a while later, the squad's first mission. According to Kyung, they would be heading to Jinhai, territory of the Red Dan zombies. Noticing Mirae's confused gaze, Kyung realized the emo Chad had probably spent most of the apocalypse trying to unalive himself and likely had no idea how the zombie groups were divided. She explained that the Red Dan, alongside other powerful groups, had conquered various cities and now treated them as their own domains. Their mission was to lure out and eliminate the Red Dan's boss, and if possible, wipe out as many members as they could. Kyuho and Dongho chimed in, explaining that this was why they'd gone after Craven. He was also a member of Red Dan and had thus been targeted for elimination. Kyung further added that this mission wouldn't be as simple as the Craven incident. Although they'd royally shit the bed in that expedition, referring to Kyuho being captured, they wouldn't make the same mistakes again. Moreover, Craven had just been a puny group leader, while their target this time controlled a whole city. They had no choice but to be careful. Done with the debrief, she added that Mirae and Garam would take on this challenge alone while the rest supported from the background. Normally, it would have been better to head in together, but they had other missions to accomplish, and Mirae was powerful as fuck, so it would be fine. Somehow. They soon arrived at Jinhai, and as expected, the city was a ruined mess. Kyung didn't care, and swiftly dropped off the mid-Garam and Mirae. After giving them one final warning to be careful, she quickly got into the van and drove off. Left as the de facto leader, Garam immediately started wilding out. Turns out this was her first mission too, and the noob almost lost her mind. She started doing the most. Somersaults, stealth rolls, like she was Jason Bourne or some shit. Luckily, Mirae was too chatty for that nonsense, so he calmly watched the maiden spiral out of control. Garam kept up her antics, imagining all the enemies they could face. The city was brimming with beast-type zombies, so running into them was inevitable. Meanwhile, the scene shifted to Kyung and the duo's so-called support team. Turns out all that talk about separate missions was a lie. They'd always intended to stick around, mostly to keep an eye on Mirae. As mighty and useful as he was, Kyung had to determine whether he was trustworthy and whether he'd listen to orders or go rogue. So they spied on the duo from afar, ready to jump in if shit hit the fan. Back to Mirae and Garam, the latter finally realized Mirae hadn't joined her Splinter Cell bullshit. She quickly called out to him, urging him to stay hidden too. Mirae looked at her passively and said, "Hell no. He might be a psycho emo, but there was no way in hell he was doing the same embarrassing crap as her." Before she could convince him otherwise, a horde of zombies stumbled onto them. As expected, the maiden James Bond lost her cool and hid even further behind the vehicle, barely daring to breathe for fear of attracting them. As she cowered, Mirae stayed rooted in place, his composure unwavering. After analyzing the zombies for a while, he turned to Garam and asked plainly, could he clap those zombie cheeks or nah? Garam looked at him like he was insane. What kind of idiot faced zombies so openly? Did he think this was a duel? And couldn't he see her spectacular stealth? That was proof enough that he should stay hidden. Unfortunately, Mirae was already on the move before she could say any of that. He simply blitzed out of existence, appearing above the zombies in an instant. Channeling his weird powers, he conjured a giant big-ass brain and yeeted it at them. The impact was devastating, its aftershocks leveling several buildings. But Mirae wasn't satisfied. He continued his offensive, charging the zombies with his green tentacles fully deployed. In one savage strike, he cleaved through both the horde and the surrounding buildings. Keeping up the pressure, he unleashed another big brain, squashing the zombies into meat paste. Then came the second barrage, then the third, until explosions ripped through the city, toppling any buildings unlucky enough to survive the first onslaught. Watching from the sidelines, the trio couldn't believe what they were seeing. They'd always known Mirae was strong, but holy hell, since when could he clap cheeks like that? If their guesses were correct, his strength was way beyond normal transcendent levels. Mirae, meanwhile, continued his certified zombie colonoscopy, polishing their asses until the survivors fled in terror. Predictably, some still came back for more smoke, rushing him in numbers. Mirae simply dug into the concrete and flipped it forward, the debris shooting out like shrapnel and tearing through anything in its path. Over at Garam, the poor maiden finally got dragged into the chaos. A few zombies lunged at her, forcing the mid-baddie to lock in. Flipping through her notebook, she activated her transcendent ability, Thunder Collapse. She blitzed through the horde, cutting down their numbers with ease. Meanwhile, Mirae continued his massacre, parkouring off nearby vehicles, closing in on the zombies in an instant, and delivering a brutal kick that tore through 3 heads in one move. Advancing the assault, he dug his foot into the ground and hurled weaponized rubble like warheads. Done with the first horde, Mirae immediately shifted to the second, blitzing through them and casually regrouping with Garam. Unfortunately for her, she wasn't having nearly as easy a time. She looked haggard as hell, barely keeping herself from collapsing. Mirae ignored her and inched toward the last zombie. He was going to kill it, but its pathetic state made him pause. Confused, he asked Garam why it looked so pitiful, and since when could zombies cry? Garam replied that after such a merciless slaughter, it was only natural for the zombies to act that way. As for the crying, it was because the zombie was of a lower class, which apparently made that okay for some reason. Mirae thought of his mother, also of the lower class, and felt a twinge of sympathy. After a moment's hesitation, he let the zombie go. It didn't stick around. It bolted immediately, disappearing before the incoming reinforcements arrived. Realizing they'd have to fight more waves, Garam cursed out loud. She was done with this shit, but the zombies kept coming. The duo fought all day and well into the night. By the time the last zombie dropped, Garam was so tired she couldn't move. She glanced at Mirae, shocked to see him completely fine, as if he could go several more rounds of that hell. Speaking of Mirae, he casually looked around, searching for their mission target, the Paladin. Garam noticed his wandering gaze and told him to forget about it. With all the destruction they'd caused, she wouldn't be surprised if the Paladin was already among the dead, and if not, the carnage would surely draw it in. Still, they should hide and rest. Mirae looked at her like she was crazy. Why hide? If zombies came, they could just kill them. In fact, that was better. They wouldn't have to go looking for their target. Garam shot that down immediately. They were there to investigate, not level the city. And besides, why was he assuming she could keep fighting? She was already at her limit. One more battle would kill her. Mirae flicked her an unbothered glance. He didn't care. So what if she died? As long as he completed the mission, it had nothing to do with him. Moreover, she was mid as fuck. Why should he care if she croaked? Garam glared at him with a deadly look. What the hell did he just say? Surely she must have misheard. Right? She inched closer, demanding that Mirae explain himself. What did he mean when he said he didn't care whether she lived or died? As the two argued, we shift scenes to Kyung, who was listening in on the conversation. Just like Garam, she too was taken aback by Mirae's coldness. However, she decided to let the conversation play out for now. Meanwhile, Garam was already getting heated. She sternly pointed out to Mirae that everything they were doing was for the greater good, to save as many lives as possible. Sure, completing missions was important, but it couldn't take priority over saving lives. That was something his stupid emo ass had to understand no matter what, and he had to stop being reckless. Mirae leaned in, staring straight into her eyes. He told her he was serious. There wasn't a single reckless bone in his body. Everything he did was for one purpose: to die. As Garam processed the severity of his words, and why he wasn't giving her the smooch after getting so close, a furious voice bellowed, demanding to know what was going on. The voice belonged to a gym bro-looking zombie, seething at the death of his men, and the sight of two brats teasing each other with some lip service in the middle of all that chaos. He had a distinct look to his frame. Blades clung to his body, a lion mask welded to his main weapons. Obvious features that helped Garam identify him as a paladin, the target of their mission. Upon realizing that, Garam immediately went from barely mid to full Sakura, completely useless trash. She dropped to her butt, paralyzed with fear. Like all certified garbage, she started spiraling out of control, giving a whole monologue on why they couldn't beat the boss. Obviously, no one wanted to hear that shit, least of all the paladin, who immediately cut her off. He repeated his earlier question, demanding to know who they were. Then, a familiar face appeared among the group. It was Craven's former lieutenant, the same bastard who got yeeted at the start of the story. Predictably, he recognized Mirae and ratted him out to the big boss. Realizing that the murderer of his brother was right before him, the paladin seethed with rage. He reached for his blades, sharpening their edges with a spinning motion. With that out of the way, he delivered the usual cliché villain speech. "You killed my family. I'll boil your bones into meat soup. I'll clap your cheeks to kingdom come." Okay, maybe not the last one, but he definitely said the others. Meanwhile, Kyung had already clocked the unfavorable turn of events. She immediately took off running, urgently trying to regroup with the duo. Back with Mirae, he tried to step forward, but was stopped by Sakura Garam. The terrified maiden pleaded with him not to go, arguing that their only hope for survival was to escape. If he insisted on continuing forward, the likely outcome would be his death. Mirae looked at her listlessly and shook off her hand. It seemed she still didn't understand. He didn't fear death. On the contrary, he embraced that smoke. He faced off against the paladin, who was already lunging in for the kill. As the fiend closed in, Mirae suddenly vanished and reappeared right in his face, then disappeared again, spawning in the middle of the horde. Without mercy, he swung his vein blades, dicing the enemies into pieces. This sudden change of events shocked the paladin, who immediately became feral with rage. He rushed forward, reason clouded by revenge. Without hesitation, he launched his first attack, a drive-by blade slash. The move was so fast, no one could react to it. The paladin pressed the attack, unleashing several more slashes, confident that Mirae was trapped in his tempo. With one final swing, he delivered what he thought was the killing blow, mercilessly dicing Mirae into pieces. Just as he was about to start his victory speech, his danger senses flared, forcing him to dodge frantically. He barely got out of the way before a stabbing hand shot past, nearly chopping off his head. The vicious strike made the paladin's skin crawl. He immediately recognized the sensation for what it was: true, unhinged terror. For the first time in a long while, he smelled it, the sickly stench of death. Without hesitation, he backpedaled, desperate to get as far away from Mirae as possible. His legs trembled violently, showing just how terrified he was. Mirae, cold as ever, landed gracefully and walked toward him. Confused, the paladin tried a new technique, zooming around Mirae to trap him in a tornado of wind and blades. He didn't forget to spew the usual villain bullshit, promising to kill Mirae for massacring his family. But it was all talk. The bastard escaped the first chance he got, running like crazy and screaming that Mirae was built different, a truly terrifying foe. He vowed to find the other bosses to help him get revenge. Unfortunately for him, Mirae had no intention of letting him go unscathed. He dashed out of the tornado, appearing above the paladin in an instant. Continuing his assault, he stabbed him in the back and lifted him into the air, preparing a nasty finisher. Meanwhile, his mind wandered to the paladin's mention of family. He too had a family, before all that shit went down. It was a humble one, but he wouldn't have had it any other way. Then the virus came and ripped it all away. His mother had turned, and he'd been forced to kill her while defending himself. Worse still, she hadn't completely lost herself. She retained enough humanity to call him her son one last time before she died. And so here he was, immortal, and unable to atone for the person he loved most, the mother he killed with his own hands. As the memories flooded in, Mirae looked at the crying zombie. Ignoring his pathetic face, he crushed him into meat paste. Garam joined him in the crimson rain, reflecting on the day's events. Meanwhile, Kyung's fake backup finally arrived. She ran toward Mirae but froze at the carnage surrounding him. With a somber expression, she asked what he'd done. The mission was to investigate and lure out the boss, not level the whole city. If that was the plan, why even call it a scouting mission? Frustrated and uneasy, she ordered everyone to retreat. They needed to leave before more hordes arrived. Still, Kyung couldn't shake the fight from her mind. The more she thought about it, the more something felt wrong. The way Mirae fought, it was like he was venting, like he was deliberately cruel in his killing. There was no shred of humanity in his actions, and that fact unsettled her deeply. She couldn't help but wonder, had she done the right thing asking him to fight for humanity? Or had she just recruited a monster?